Again, you'll see several different folders that are there. The state modifications are because states have their own rules, other states have needed to change the slideshow and the script slightly. So if you look there, we've got Colorado's set up, and they made a file so that any other state can pick it up and make modifications for themselves. The other folder that's not connected with the slideshow and the script is called Excuses for Not Voting. And this is a game that we use at the end of this. And we use it at the end because you can play it for a long time, or you can do just one or two, and it's still going to have an impact. But just like the avatar cards, there are excuses cards. And I print these, if I can get this to come up. Here we go. So you can see excuse number one is here, and then a possible response for excuse number one follows it. So I print these two back to back, again on 3x5 or 4x6 cards. And there are, I think, 40 different excuses here. Yeah, 40. So as long as you've got a class of less than 40 kids, this slideshow is fine. There is a document with additional excuses that you can create your own slideshow for if you know you're going to have a bigger group. Now, I'll tell you something that I love about this is that this is not just something you can use with kids. The city of Patterson has started a new league, and I used this excuses game with them, one of their first meetings. Each person gets a card, and they're supposed to study their question and the possible answer. So they know one excuse and one way to respond to that excuse if somebody says it to them. So you've got 20 people, they've all got excuses. So we've got 20 excuses in the room. And you pick someone at random to read the first excuse, not the answer, just the excuse. And then you ask, that person gets to ask anybody else in the room to respond to it. And they can respond in full, or they can respond, give a little bit of the answer. And then the person who has the card can fill in and make the answer more complete. And then the person that was put on the spot and had to answer it gets to read their card. Well, that league decided they were going to start every one of their meetings with one of those excuses so that they would be prepared to respond to people who said, oh, I don't want to vote because why should I do anything? Party doesn't do anything for me. And I thought that was pretty ingenious of them. So the excuses cards are used at the very end of this lesson, but that's where they are. And that's what I do with them, back to back. And then I laminate them again because I use them a lot, but you don't have to do that. Okay. Module and script again. And just so you can see the script, this is true of the other one too. The slide number is down the side. There's an image of the slide, and then there are the actual words that you get to say. And as like this one needs to be updated, but it will be updated automatically so that when you go to use the slideshow, the script should match the slide exactly. So this is the tool that's there for you as the presenter. Again, if you're starting, if this is the only one you do, you would start by giving a league introduction. If the timeline of suffrage hasn't been taught before this one, I use this slide to go through and just give people a quick overview of how long it took to get to where we are today and what the changes were. But I might take 5 minutes at the most to talk about that, just so people have a framework for how difficult it's been. Okay, so who's deciding your future? I want you to write down on a scrap piece of paper or whatever. You could write it in the chat if you want. What percentage of people who were eligible to vote do you think actually voted in the 2020 presidential election? So that's nationwide. What percentage actually voted? Okay, we have 39. Gotta put my glasses on for a little tight. All right. 69, 63.
I'm
30.
pushing, Pat, I'm pushing my chat button, but I don't get a box to chat. I wonder. It's obviously me because others are contributing.
Louise, are you on a tablet or your laptop?
My laptop.
It should just be down there. You might not realize, just start typing and see if it types in.
See if we can see it. Okay, well, what would you say, Louise? What's your guess?
I'd say 35%.
Okay, so we've got everything here from 30 up to, I think, what was it, 69%, roughly. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing. Okay, the voter turnout in 2020, 60.2% of the population that was eligible to vote actually turned out to vote. So it's not just registered voters, it was eligible to vote. Of course, they have to be registered to do that, but there's still a difference between the percentage that's registered and the percentage that's eligible. All right, that is not bad because it wasn't that good. In 2018, only 50% of the population turned out to vote. That means, remember those people standing up, there's still this whole big group of a third of the population that is not exercising their right to vote. An aside, down at the bottom here, I'm not going to play this whole thing, but there is a video on here where Newark, New Jersey residents were asked whether or not they voted in the Board of Education election. And in most cases, they didn't even know it existed. So it was pretty eye-opening. And if you're teaching, if it's around a Board of Education election time and you want to get people's eyes opened, even just playing a minute of that one can be worthwhile. All right, well, let's set the stage. Here's why it's important. Why do elections matter? What are some of the things that you care about that elections can decide? And I would ask the kids to participate. So you can call out because I think I have unmuted all of you. What's something that matters to you personally?
A woman's right to choose.
Okay, how about something else?
The environment.
Okay.
Health care for all.
Okay.
Being allowed to vote.
Okay.
Immigration.
One more.
How my taxes are spent.
Okay, good. All right. We have a couple of things on here that were given to us by groups of students in the past, and many of the things that you mentioned are there. So people who vote in elections or people who elect people are making decisions about things that we care about, like immigration, like the environment, like guns, like taxes, like war, like healthcare, like education, and then there are others. And I'm going to pause here again as an aside. The star that has guns on it has the word guns separately. It's not gun control and it's not gun rights because we got some pushback. We had gun control initially. And a student in a very red district said, I think that's left leaning. He said, I wouldn't say that. I would say that should say gun rights. And I went, holy crow, you're absolutely right. So we just narrowed it down to the one word because we're not trying to tell kids one way or the other to think. We just think that's an issue, and it's an issue to a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. So let me get back to where I was before I digressed. Okay, so how do elections make a difference? What does it matter that those things matter to us and that elections impact them? And in most cases, the kid is going to say, well, people who are elected make the laws about those things, which is right. You can add to that by saying people who are elected in the past have done things like make decisions about outlawing slavery or allowing it, prohibiting women from owning property or allowing them to own it, drafting 18-year-olds into the army, closing our borders or opening our borders, outlawing abortion or allowing abortion. People that are elected to office make those decisions on an everyday basis. And it's true even down to our local schools and our local towns. People elected make decisions about things like school hours, and what's funded and what's not funded. People who are elected locally make decisions about building parks, improving roads. So every election matters. People make decisions about things that we care about. Oops, pardon me. And again, if I had done the other lesson, I wouldn't use in New Jersey who can vote because we're reinforcing that. Okay, this slide is one that we use in order to make sure that kids really understand how to read a graph. I know they've had lessons in their math classes and their social studies classes, but because we're going to be using graphs throughout the rest of it, I want to make sure that they can see that graphs can be misleading if they're not reading it correctly. So take a look at this graph. One of the things that I want you to notice is that it doesn't go from 0 to 100. If you look carefully, if you haven't looked, notice that the lower part of this says, or the lowest axis says 30, and the highest axis says 65. Try to imagine in your mind how the graph would look different if it started at 0 and it went up to 100. What would look different about it? And again, you can call out and tell me.
The lines would be much flatter without all the zigzagging.
So you would have more space at the top and the bottom. Would that
Right.
change your perspective on how those lines are arranged?
And the highs and the lows would not look so far apart.
Yeah, yeah. Any other observations that anybody can make?
Perhaps the difference between presidential and midterm elections would be a little shrunk. Or, I mean,
Yeah, it would look much less, it wouldn't look
Of a
so wide
different-
apart. It
yeah.
would look like they were much closer together than they are right now. One of the other things now, you recognize that was presidential elections and midterm elections, but not every kid is going to look down at the bottom.
Oh,
So you say to them, what do those different colors mean? And
okay.
if they don't know, okay, look at the bottom and see what it's telling you. Okay, you can see that the blue line is midterm elections and the purple line is presidential elections.
Mm.
Okay. Now take a look at the years that are listed across the bottom there. Most people wouldn't expect a 6-year difference between each one of the vertical axes. Why do you think that's the case? Why would they do that? And how might it change your perception? Makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, well, my perception, my take on it is, and I could be wrong, but because they're trying to show presidential elections and midterm elections, this one is a presidential election, this one's a midterm election.
Mhm.
This is presidential, this is midterm. So I think they're trying to say we're not just picking out every 4-year presidential election. We're giving the graph a chance to show us both things. But at any rate, that's my take on it. There could be another reason for it. The next thing I say to them is, all right, what do you notice about those two lines? What is something that they tell you for sure when you look at it?
They seem to run together, like if one, let me just see. If one goes down, the other goes down, and one goes up, the other goes up.
Yes, and that's one of the things that the kids will pick up on. Sometimes they'll pick up on this. This was 2018 midterm.
Oh, and that's, yeah.
And then look over here. So that's kind of intriguing that a midterm election actually had greater turnout than a presidential election back here. Well, what years were those? So this would have been 1920 and 1924. What was going on in our world at that time?
The women were able to vote.
Right. So that all those kinds of things. So we say to the kids, graphs can be really interesting, but they can be really confusing. And you can't jump to conclusions about what you see on the graph. When you look at this one, there are some things you can say absolutely, like in 2018, the turnout in that election was higher than the turnout in 1920 and 1924, which was a presidential election. You can say for sure that those two lines tend to reflect one another as they move through history most of the time. You can say that turnout in presidential elections is higher than turnout in midterm elections. You can make some assumptions. But you can't know those for sure. So you can make an assumption that in 2018, something was going on that made people want to vote in a midterm election. What might that have been? You can make the assumption that in 1924, women's turnout was really, really low. Why might that have been? There might have been a lot of women who didn't think they should vote. Those are assumptions. So what we want kids to do is to learn that there are facts they can get from a graph, and there are assumptions. And there are times when I use an actual Jamboard, or when we have a whiteboard in the classroom and we put up fact and assumption, and so we will list them on the board, just so kids begin to realize that there are things they can learn from a graph, but they also have to be really cautious about some of the things. Okay, so let's go on here. So the rest of the time today, we're going to be talking about who has the power of the vote. We're going to look at a series of graphs. And if you've got a piece of paper nearby and you can write down some notes for yourself, it might be helpful. But in this particular series of graphs, what we're doing is we're looking at voter turnout by age. We're looking just at presidential elections. And we're looking at the years from 2000 to 2020. And the axis goes from 0 to 100. This blue line, the key at the bottom, says that these are 18 to 24-year-olds, and this is the turnout in those years by 18 to 24-year-olds. This is the turnout of 25 to 44-year-olds. This is the turnout among groups of people 45 to 64 years of age. And this is the turnout among people 65 to 74. So what I want you to do is to write down one thing you know for sure, one fact you can state about what you see there. And then I'd like you to make one assumption. And then we're going to go on. There is a set of slides in here about gender that I just flipped through. I don't use those right now because gender is too touchy a subject in New Jersey. So I just hide those when I'm doing it in a classroom. But let's go on to how does voter turnout vary by race and ethnicity? Right. Same thing, 0 to 100, same years across the bottom. This time we're talking about racial groups. Now, this is taken from the US Census Bureau, and they identify race and ethnicity differently. So this line represents non-Hispanic white people. This is how the turnout among non-Hispanic whites. This is the turnout during those same years among non-Hispanic blacks. This is the turnout among Hispanic people of any race. And this is the turnout among Asian people. Again, write down one thing you can say for sure and one assumption.
Hmm.
And then the next series of slides deal with education level. Again, this particular graph I have got to fix. I keep saying that to myself and I keep forgetting it. This one goes from 30 to 100. It should be 0 to 100, but I think you can tell, you're intelligent enough to be able to image those 20 and 10 and 0 below it. This line shows turnout among people who have less than a high school education. So they're dropouts for one reason. Now we go to 0 again. So this red line adds people who have graduated from high school but haven't gone any further. This represents those who have some college, all the way up to having a college degree. And this line represents those who have a postgraduate degree. So again, what's one thing you can say for sure? What's one thing you can assume based on what's there?
Hmm.
Pat, I have a question. On all these slides, is it looking at all white people, all black people, or all college and all high school grads, or is it those who are registered? What's the denominator?
This is voter turnout, so it's the people who actually voted.
No, but people who voted, but what's the denominator there? Is it the number of people in our country with that demographic
Yes.
characteristic?
Yes.
And
Yes.
not those who are registered?
This is
Yeah.
not showing the number of people registered to vote. This is showing the number of people who actually voted.
Who actually voted,
so it's a portion of the
divided
registered
by-
voters.
oh,
It's a smaller part. I mean, there would be more registered voters than there would be voters.
those who actually voted.
Right.
But not everybody is registered.
Right,
Well,
I
they
get,
can't vote if they're not registered.
I get what Louise is saying, because if you're doing it by all registered voters, you'd have 100% every time.
No, you wouldn't, because not
So
everybody,
Percentage, oh wait, no, I'm sorry. I take that back. But I get what she's saying in a way. Is it saying it's 60% voted that are registered to vote, or 60% voted that are eligible to vote?
That it's the actual voter turnout. So it's not the percentage of the voters who are registered, it's the actual percentage, the percentage of the population that actually turned out to vote.
oh, okay. So that's the broadest denominator
Right.
to compute that, because if it was if the base were number registered, not every college educated person registers to vote.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
but let's I don't want to go in the weeds on
Sure,
this.
no, no.
I want to show you what would happen next. The kids
Okay.
would have all of this information and they've each written their own thing. Now they get put into small groups. And within the small groups, they need to come up with a statement that they can all agree to, that they can know for sure. from the data that they just took a look at. And then we're also going to ask them about some of the assumptions that they could make. So since we're a small enough group, talk with one another and tell one another something that you feel is absolutely certain from what you saw.
From
More
any,
people need to
from any of
vote.
the graphs, it doesn't matter.
Pardon?
From any of the three graphs.
From any of the three graphs, right?
Okay,
Do you
so
want me
I'll
to go
say
back to
that-
the graphs?
The higher the level of education, the larger the greater chance that person will vote.
Okay, good. That's one thing for sure.
And same with the age range.
Right. Age range.
The older the person is, the more higher rate of turnout for voting.
Right.
Yeah, the older adults seem to be more consistent on their voting throughout.
Very consistent on the voting. They were almost a flat line. The old.
I would wonder if the less than high school voters seem to think that their vote doesn't count and it's a waste of time.
All right, that's a good assumption. That's not something you can know for sure, but that's a really good assumption. So what other assumptions might we make from some of what you saw?
That might be true for the people with lower education also. They might not feel that their vote counts.
Okay, how about some others?
I did
Also,
in 2004, it seemed like people didn't care as much.
Okay,
Also, it seems that the
2016
immigrants are on the uprise of taking a active interest and in voting.
okay. Part of that was something you can know for sure, and part of it was an assumption. So you can see that the lines went up as time went on, that the Asian and the Hispanic population turnout did increase. The assumption is that they're more interested.
My
Yes.
assumption on that was that there were just more people of Asian and
That's
Hispanic
another,
background.
that's
That
another
was my
thing.
assumption.
Well, I mean, together in that, black voter turnout was higher than white voter turnout in 08 and 012. The assumption could be that a black man was running for president.
That's one that the kids will come up with all the
Yeah.
time. That's a really interesting graph too. You initially, when we used those, we went all the way back to the year 2000. And you could see very clearly then that the white voter turnout was here and the black voter turnout was here until all of a sudden you got to 2008 and it went up and it went over and then it went down again. So you could see that blip. I mean, it just knocked you out. When you look at the one that we have, it just looks like, oh, 1 year it was whites higher, 1 year it was blacks higher. It really doesn't show the change that indicated in time. So I thought that was really an interesting thing. It made me wonder whether we should go back to the other one or not. And then I
Yeah.
thought, well, no, this is the kids' lifetimes. So they should be looking at data that affects them, I think. But that's up for debate too. Okay, so you've done what they would do, and then essentially what we pull out of them is what's on the next slide. And that is, so who's making the decisions? Well, turns out that historically, if you're old, if you're white, and if you're well educated, it's more likely that you'll vote. And then we laugh and we say, and do you wonder why we see so many old white men in Washington? That's who's electing them. Now, who has the power today? Well, it turns out that voter turnout is a big deal. If you want the politicians to make the decisions that you want them to make, then you've got to get involved. You have to elect people who reflect your values. And I want you to listen to me if you hear nothing else today. Right now, young people from the ages of 18 to 29 are just slightly less than half of the voting eligible population.
Oh my gosh.
In the next presidential election, not this one, but in 2028, you will have the slight majority. So if you turn out to vote, you will have an enormous impact on what happens in this country, in this state, in your town, and in your school. But you have to vote. Is there change ahead? Well, perhaps. In 2024, the number of people in Gen Z who will be eligible to vote is 41 million. There's 8 million new voters since 2022. And nearly half of those newly eligible voters are people of color. If you turn out to vote, that's going to be reflected in who gets elected. I'm going to skip that. These were put in by the people in Colorado. I forgot to take them out. So how do we make that happen? Well, we know from psychology that you are the people who are most likely to influence other people your age to vote. So how can you do that? Well, we need you to do a couple of things. We need you to help people register to vote, help them understand that it's important and help them learn how to do it and encourage them to actually take that act. You can also use psychology. And you can also remind them that they can vote by mail. They don't need an excuse. So they don't even have to get up off their butts. And then you can also remind people when election day is coming. But let's talk a little bit more about that psychology piece. What are some of the things you can say or do? And then why does it work? Well, one of the first things that can be done is to make it normal, make it the norm that people like you vote. Everybody wants to fit in. So you can say something like, it's really important to me that everybody who's eligible registers and votes. Will you join me at the polls and will you make your voice heard? And that's just an example. You can put that in kid talk. You know how to do that better than I do. You can call them names. And that's kind of a weird way of saying you want somebody to be something, not just do something one time. So we want people to think of themselves as voters, people who will do that every single time an election comes up. So we'll call them that. We'll say, you're a voter, aren't you? Instead of saying, you're going to vote, which is a one-time action. So try to keep that in mind. Try to make them be something. You're a voter, aren't you? The other thing is, we know that people are much more likely to do something if they actually make a plan to do it. So you can help them address their commitment issues. Help them actually make a plan. Ask them questions like, what time are you going to the polls? How are you going to get there? Do you need a ride? Can I help you get that? And then promise that you're going to follow up, because nobody likes to let somebody else down. So you can say something, I'll text you on election day and see how it was the first time you voted. Or call me when you're done. Or take a picture of yourself and send it to me. Put it on Snap. So why don't some people vote? And this is where this game comes in. Well, lots of people have excuses. Some people will say something like, why should I vote for a candidate that doesn't do anything for me as a voter? So how would you answer that? Or if the election's close, I'll vote, but not otherwise. How would you answer that? I tried to vote the last time, but then the lady told me I couldn't because she said I had voted by mail when I hadn't. She wouldn't let me vote that day. So how would you answer that? Or it's such a long process, I don't have the time. So that's when we pass out those cards, the excuses cards, And we say, all right, here is one excuse. You memorize the answer to this, and then you're going to have the chance to play a game with it. The nice thing about it is that it's a filler. It can take you can ask as many questions as you have time to fill the in. And the other thing that's nice is that I will leave the list of questions with the teachers and say, you know, those 2 minutes at the end of class when you don't want to go on to the next thing, or and you know, you don't want to have to do something, and instead of just saying to the kids, okay, you can talk to each other until the bell rings, ask them one of these questions and give them
Great
the
closing.
opportunity to see if they can come up with a way to respond to some of the typical excuses for not voting. And that's worked pretty well. We've had some people, you know, jump in and try to do that. So that's the brief lesson. But the big message is, you kids have power, but you've got to vote. If you don't vote, you're giving up that power, and you're letting those old white people make all the decisions for you. So I promised you that I would share some of the things that kids had said from the, right, I think. There we go. I'm just going to let you read through some of these things. There were, like I said, there were about 300 girls. So some of these were duplicated. I'm just going to flip down to the next sections.
Mm. Oh my gosh.
Which one made you say that?
I used to think that voting was only for white people.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
It's probably based on experience of local, family or local people not voting.
So anyway, 50 minutes of instruction brought those changes to people, to young people.
Mm.
That's pretty remarkable, I think. And it's what keeps me going. It's a legacy type thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, Pat, do you prepare a summary to give back to the teacher of the students' comments? Or is
I
that,
do.
yeah,
I do.
I would think that's very helpful. Yeah.
It's very encouraging for the teachers
Yeah.
to know that they've had that kind of an impact.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing right now. So what I do is I give them a card, and it's their exit ticket for the day. And they have to say, before I came into this room today, I used to think, but now I think. So how did your thinking change? So just for yourself, write it down.
Can I just ask a question first?
Sure.
you know, when you were talking about the excuse cards and students talking to other students about, you know, why it's important to vote.
Mhm.
Do you also encourage the students to talk to family members?
Yes. Oh, good question. That's another, it's actually another program, but I'm gonna show it to you because it's something that, where's my, all the way down at the bottom on the voting side is what we call the Student Voting Advocate Toolkit. And it is it's a slideshow. There's a QR code on it. I'm gonna open it up. So we give them the excuses game again on this because it can be used when the kids use this slideshow, they can use the excuses game. So they've got it right there. It's been adapted for Arizona and Colorado already, and there's a template so you can use it in other states as well. But in New Jersey, we've got English ones and a Spanish one. We have all 21 counties because every county has different voting machines. So every single county here has its own unique program. But I'm going to show, because I'm in, let's do Morris County because a whole bunch of you are from there. So we encourage, this came about during COVID, a little background. That year we said, you know, we've got all this hullabaloo in New Jersey about how are we going to vote by mail for the first time, and nobody knew how to do it. There was all kinds of dissension. People couldn't register to vote by normal means. And we said, how are we going to handle this? And so we said, well, we go into schools, let's give the kids a tool to use when they work with other people in their households. And so that's how this was developed. So they use the QR code, and if you take a picture of that right now, you'll find that you have that on your phone, that you have the whole slideshow on your phone. So if you care, just try it and see what happens. But through that, it's broken down into sections. And I'm going to go to this slide just to show you.
Oh,
So
I just got it.
each one of these sections has a blue header sheet. So if the kids are facing a question about how do I help somebody register to vote, they go to that section. If they want to answer questions about voting early, they go to that section. It's all designed specifically for them. And it's linked to the state website, New Jersey Votes, as well as Vote 411. So the importance of voting, the kids can talk to somebody else about the different levels of government that exist. And there is a script for this, and there are notes for the teacher too. So they have the people identify the issues that they care about, and that there are decisions made on every level of government on things like the environment or things like crime, that sort of thing. This has not yet been updated for 2024, but that's because the boards of elections didn't yet have the information for the dates for the primaries out yet. They are out now, and so this will be updated for every single county. So each time there's a new election, the new dates will appear in these slideshows. And that will happen automatically on when you use the QR code, you get the current one.
Pat, I tried the QR code. I have a
I
feeling
didn't get it to work either.
Yeah, it
No.
doesn't work.
So it has been deleted. So either it's been
Yeah.
moved or the QR code's not right or something.
Thank you.
Yeah, it says the file has been deleted.
Yeah. Obviously hasn't been because you've got it here, but maybe it was the old version of the file.
It may, I will, thank you. I will double check that. I'm glad that you asked the question that led us to this, because that would have been embarrassing to teach a class. All right, so what happens when you don't vote? There are some of the slides that you saw, so they can talk about who's being heard. There's the excuses game, and they know where to find the excuses. There's a section on primary elections in New Jersey and why vote on one. This one, when we teach it to them, it's animated. So there's a primary election. How does it happen? So there's a black party and they have 3 candidates that are running. There's a blue party, they have 3 candidates that are running. So the black party chooses their winner, the blue party chooses their winner, and then those 2 winners go up against each other in the general election when everybody can vote on the person that they want the most. Section on mail-in ballots, how do you get one? Section on registering.
Pat, this looks so much like the one that the Voter Services Coalition did. Or did you do this from scratch, or did you use one that was semi-made already?
This was done from scratch. I
That's a
didn't do
shame.
this, but it's another one of our,
That's a shame. There's one that's already done. This is what we're trying to avoid in the
Yeah.
state. That one group does something, another group does something, and they're trying. That's why we're trying to make things centralized in the state, for coming from the state.
right. That's one of the problems, I think, with a grassroots organization is that
Oh,
it's hard to do that kind of coordination when you've got to come, from the ground up. Everybody's doing something at the ground level, and it
yeah.
doesn't appear until you're at the higher level. So the Voter Services Committee did this for every county in the state, or what did they do?
We did a general template, and it has places where you can fill in your county stuff. We didn't go that,
Can you
it's
send me the link to that, Barbara?
sure. I will send it to you now so I don't forget.
Thank you. Okay, but at any rate, that's available. And it is also accessible through the website. So you can get the information, and I will do my due diligence